The Gran Sport name has been used on several high-performance muscle cars built by Buick. As Buick was the luxury brand one level below Cadillac, which did not have performance models, Buick GS branded models were the most opulently equipped models from GM during this era. Skylark Gran Sport. The 1965 Skylark Gran Sport was the intermediate Buick Skylark with the Gran Sport option added. Although a 303 V8 was already offered in the Skylark, the Gran Sport had the largest engine permitted by GM, a 400 cubic inches Buick V8. This engine was actually 401 cubic inches, but called a 400 by Buick because that was the maximum engine size limit set by General Motors for the intermediate body cars. This engine produced 325 horsepower and 445 lb-ft and was known as the nailhead engine. Buick sold more than 15,000 Skylarks with the Gran Sport option that first year, and almost as many the next. It was renamed the GS 400 in 1967, and the Gran Sport became its own model in that same year along with a new 400 engine quite different from the famously reliable but becoming obsolete nailhead engine design that was first introduced in 1953. Sales fell somewhat in the face of increasingly higher performance and more popular muscle cars from other marques when compared to those from the more stodgy and expensive Buick. Buick, however, stepped it up a notch when introducing the Stage 1 option in 1969. This limited production version delivered 340 horsepower and 440 lb-ft. The name Gran Sport replaced the GS moniker with the 1973 Gran Sport, and was again revived in the late 80s on the FWD Skylark model with various performance options added. Gran Sport 340/350. In 1967 Buick added a 340 cubic inches version. There was the GS 340 and the GS California sub-model, little more than the Skylark hardtop with new badging and trim. The 340 produced 260 horsepower and 365 lb-ft, and less than 4,000 cars were sold. It was replaced the next year with the GS 350 and similar GS California. These used Buick's 350 cubic inches small block engine. A California two-door coupe appeared in 1969. Total GS sales for the year, not counting the new California coupe, were 12,465. Sales of the GS 350 for 1970 climbed to 9,948. In addition, 10,148 455 cubic inches two-doors were built. The Gran Sport 350 outlived its big brothers, lasting until V8 Gran Sport production stopped in 1975, replaced by the Gran Sport 231. Gran Sport 400. In 1968 and 1969 Buick offered the GS 400 in a convertible and hardtop model. Standard issue of the GS 400 was a 400 cubic inch engine of 340 horsepower and 440 feet lbs torque, a 4-barrel Rochester carburetor, dual exhaust, 2.93 standard gear ratio optional, and the available 3-speed turbo-hydromatic 400 automatic transmission, U-shape shifter and linkage, located at the front of a center console. A 1968 or 1969 GS 400 equipped with a TH400 auto transmission was faster off the line, and up to 70 miles per hour than the 4-speed GS 455 to come. Shift pattern for the TH400: park, reverse, neutral, drive, second, first. A standard 3SPD or optional 4SPD manual gearbox was also available. Compression ratio on this engine was a very sensible 10.251, which allowed for the use of any grade gasoline to be used in normal driving without pinging. Gran Sport 455. The 400 was replaced for 1970 with the 7.4-liter Buick V8, used in the GS 455. The base model V8 was rated 350 horsepower and 510 lb-ft at 2,800 RPMs. In the optional Stage 1 trim it was rated 360 horsepower and 510 lb-ft at a low 2,800 RPMs. As with all American engines produced prior to the 1972 model year, these were SA gross ratings, which are generally significantly higher than SAE net ratings and are not indicative of what actual production engines produce in their as-installed condition. The fastest magazine test results from this period were obtained by Motor Trend magazine, which managed to extract a 13.38 ET at 105.5 miles per hour from their 3,810-pound GS Stage 1 coupe test car. Using Hale's trap speed formula, this result indicated actual as-installed peak HP of approximately 360 SAE net. The use of the larger-sized 455 block created a maintenance problem by the exhaust manifolds being in too close proximity to the upper and lower A-arm bushings. Heat would literally melt the bushings after a relatively short period of time. Rapid tire wear and front-end alignment difficulties were the first sign of this common problem. The December 2004 issue of Muscle Car Enthusiast conducted an engine dynamometer test of a freshly rebuilt and well-documented 1970 455 Stage 1. In that condition and with factory timing and carburetor tuning, the engine produced a maximum of 360.9 horsepower. Optimal carburetor and ignition tuning yielded a peak HP reading of 381.7 horsepower, again with no engine fan, air cleaner or mufflers in place. While urban legend would have us believe that these engines made 420 horsepower from the factory, actual empirical results prove otherwise. Although another dynamometer test on a 1970 Cadillac GS Stage I showed 471 SAE gross HP, which is more consistent with the engine producing about 360 SAE net HP. The Stage 1 engine option used cylinder heads that, while using raw castings of the same pattern as all of the other Buick 455s sharing the same model year, were machined differently in order to accept larger valves, and to produce smaller compression chambers for increased static compression ratio. The option also included a more aggressive camshaft, a specially tuned 4-barrel quadrajet carburetor, more aggressive ignition timing, 5/8-inch oil pickup tube and a higher numerical final drive, and was available with either turbo-hydromatic 403-speed automatic transmission, or a Muncie M22 4-speed manual transmission. Stage 1 cars equipped with air conditioning received a 3.42 axle ratio. While powerful in production form, the Buick 455 engines had problematic engine blocks. All used 2-bolt main bearing caps. The oiling system was undersized for high RPM use and thin walls in the lifter valleys promoted cracking. The magic of the Stage 1, it would seem, was primarily attributable to its advanced cylinder heads and the relatively high mid-range horsepower they produced. The relatively unknown, very expensive, and very rare 1970 GS 455 Stage 1 drew a great amount of attention and controversy in the muscle car world when in the 1980s it was listed as faster than any of the Chrysler Hemi cars in the original 50 fastest muscle cars list. This Hemi versus Stage 1 controversy has prompted several contests to settle the issue. It remains an unsettled matter and has been a great boon to car magazine sales over the years. There was also a rare Stage 2 option produced. This was a dealer-installed package, first offered in 1969. It included a cam, headers, intake manifold, high-compression forged pistons, hollow pushrods, and some calibration changes to the ignition and carburetor. If the car was ordered with the Stage 2 package, the parts were shipped in the trunk of the car. In 1970, the Stage 2 package included special D-port exhaust port Stage 2 heads, matching custom brand headers, a radical cam, high-compression forged pistons, Edelbrock B4B aluminum intake, Holley carburetor, and other equipment for racing. Few Stage 2s were ever used on the street and Buick only ever factory-assembled one Stage 2 test unit. It was a factory GSX clone test mule with 4-speed manual transmission used for speed testing. That GSX test mule was equipped with 4.78 gearing and was driven on the streets and tracks on the West Coast. The Stage 2 package's existence was not made public until 1972 when the Stage 2 parts could be ordered in any combination. There is little documentation about any Stage 2 cars that were sold. 3 are known to exist. One was campaigned by Ken Bell Reynolds Buick and the other was known as the Jones-Benisk car. The Jones-Binnis car is known to have been delivered as a Stage 1 car with all the Stage 2 components in the trunk in GM boxes. The third one is known as Wile E. Coyote and the Turner car. It was originally owned by Bob Thetford and campaigned as Wile E. Coyote in the NHRA. Sponsored by Ken Bell and Dunn Buick in Oklahoma City. Later it was owned by Jim Turner and was very successful in NMCA, winning 5 national records. All 3 of these cars were built as Stage 1 cars at the factory. Output and sales for the assembly line cars were down after 1970, largely due to reduced engine compression ratios and a change from gross to net horsepower ratings. In later years, air quality regulations further limited the power, in part due to the addition of catalytic converters and single exhaust pipes. However, Stage 2 parts were available over the Buick parts counter, although the Stage 2 heads were discontinued after about 75 sets were produced. The discontinuation was due to porosity problems with castings. The discontinuation of the Stage 2 also was due to the ever-tightening emission standards, which resulted in lower performance. GSX GSX Stage 1 was Buick's contribution to the classic-era American muscle car list, based on the Skylark platform, adding a high-performance package available only on the GS 455 starting in 1970. The GSX performance and handling package was a $1,100 option on the GS 455. The GSX was Buick's very late entry into the muscle car market, following less than spectacular sales late in the 1969 model year. The GSX was Buick's answer to Pontiac's GTO Judge, Oldsmobile's 4-4-2 W30, and Plymouth's Hemi Cuda. Buick advertised it as a brand new brand of Buick, and another light-your-fire car from Buick. It came standard with a 455 engine with or without the optional Stage 1 Performance engine upgrades during the first year of release. Due to the late introduction of the GSX, a prototype was displayed at the Chicago Motor Show in February 1970. Very little model-specific advertising was done. The GSX did not appear in any of the model catalogs for 1970, having been released long after catalog printing had been completed. Only 678 GSXs were produced in the second half of the 1970 model year, beginning in March 1970. Just 278 were equipped with the standard 455. A further 400 purchases selected the optional Stage 1 performance package. The performance of a GSX Stage 1 is comparable to and possibly surpasses that of the Hemi Cuda, but in a much more luxurious car. The impressive performance is partly due to the lightweight of the 455, which is roughly 150 pounds less than the 426 Hemi or Chevrolet 454. At 510 pounds ft, the Buick 455 produced the highest torque output of any American production performance car, a record held for 33 years until finally surpassed by the Series 2 V10 Viper in 2003. The 1970 Buick GSX has arguably the most extensive list of standard high-performance features of any classic-era muscle car. In 1970, the GSX option was available in only 2 colors, satin yellow and Apollo white. Came with only full black interior. All GSXs had the distinctive full-body length black stripe that crossed over the standard equipment rear spoiler and was outlined in red pinstripes. A large area of the hood was also black with a hood-mounted tachometer and black front spoiler. Also standard equipment were black bucket seats, floor shifter, wide oval tires, quick ratio steering and anti-sway bars front and rear, and quad-link suspension attached to a limited slip rear differential. Some other options were automatic transmission or 4-speed manual, AC or non-AC. Restored matching numbers versions have sold in Barrett-Jackson's and Mecum auctions for as much as $165,000. During 1971 and 1972, the GSX package became an option that was available on any Gran Sport. Production dropped in 1971 to only 124, and again to 44 in 1972. These numbers include the available 350 to 4 barrels option, the standard 455, and the Stage 1 engines. Many GSXs survive to this day and can be seen at the Buick Gran Sport Nationals held annually in Bowling Green, Kentucky in the middle of May, along with many other examples of 60s, 70s and 80s Buick performance models. Another Buick event is the Buick Performance Group Nationals, which is held at National Trail Raceway in Columbus, Ohio during the early month of August. The GSX and Big Block V8 were dropped after 1974. In 1974, the GSX consisted of a trim package on Buick's small, X-bodied Apollo. 3 engines were available on the 1974 GSX, the Chevrolet supplied 256-cylinder, and 2 Buick engines, the 352-barrel and 354-barrel versions. Riviera Gran Sport. The Riviera Gran Sport was a high-performance luxury version of the Buick Riviera, produced from 1965 through 1975. In 1965, it was called Riviera Gran Sport and the later models were still officially called Gran Sport but showed GS badges instead of Gran Sport. Unlike the mid-size GS models, the Riviera and Wildcat GS package included a standard 3.42 posit traction rear axle until 1973. The 1965 Riviera Gran Sport also came with a 425 cubic Super Wildcat engine, with dual carbs and dual snorkel chrome air cleaner. You could add H2 option for even better road handling. Shorter gear ratio for steering, 1-inch lower suspension. Wildcat Gran Sport. Another GS option package was available on the Buick Wildcat and Wildcat Custom, hardtop and convertible. The GS package included a 3.42 ratio per C rear, variable rate suspension springs, quick ratio steering box, heavy-duty sway bars, and a switch-pitch turbo-hydromatic 400 transmission. The addition of the Y48 option gave the purchaser a pair of Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors, and finned aluminum valve covers on the 425 nail-head engine. This was a one-year-only option, existing in 1966 only. The Y48 option was delivered in the trunk and installed by the dealer. Century Gran Sport. Indiana, 1973-75 and in 1986, there was a Century Gran Sport. For 1973, Buick renamed its intermediate line from Skylark to Century, a nameplate previously used on Buick's full-sized performance cars from 1936 to 1942 and 1954 to 1958. Like all GM intermediates, the 1973 Century received new colonnade styling, which amounted to pillared hardtop sedans, coupes and station wagons, each of which utilized frameless windows along with fixed rear side windows, and convertibles were discontinued. The GS became the Gran Sport, and was now an option package on the semi-fastback Century 350 Colonnade coupes. The Gran Sport option included decals on the rear fenders and trunk lid reading Gran Sport along with suspension and appearance upgrades. The standard engine was a 150 horsepower 352-barrel V8, which was the standard engine for all Centuries. In addition to the 175 horsepower 354-barrel V8, the 190 horsepower 354-barrel V8 was available only on the Gran Sport. Two 455 cubic inch V8s were available, including the 250 horsepower 4-barrel and a Stage 1 4-barrel rated at 270 horsepower, all net figures and similar to the 1972 models. More than 773 Century GS models were built with a Stage 1 455, the majority with the 3-speed turbo-hydromatic 400 transmission and a small number with a 4-speed manual transmission. The 1974 Century Gran Sport received the same exterior and interior trim changes as other Century models. The same selection of engines was carried over from 1973, including the 354-barrel, 455 4-barrel and the 455 Stage 1 4-barrel and, like all other 74 Century GS engines, only available with a turbo-hydromatic transmission. Radial tires were a new option for 1974 along with reclining strato bucket seats. For 1975, the Century GS, or Gran Sport, entered its third and final year on the Colonnade body. it was reduced to a mere appearance handling package as the 455/stage I options were discontinued and Buick's revived 231 cubic inch V6 was the standard engine, mated to a standard 3-speed manual transmission or optional turbo-hydromatic. The only optional engines were two 350 V8s, a 2-barrel 155 horsepower version or the 4-barrel option rated at 175 horsepower and offered only with the turbo-hydromatic. Both engines were also mated to catalytic converters for the first time this year, which mandated the use of unleaded gasoline and precluded the availability of true dual exhaust systems. Radial tires were now standard equipment and the Strato bucket seat option reverted to the non-reclining version. Both the Century GS and the larger Riviera GS were discontinued after the 1975 model year due to sagging sales for high-performance cars following the 1973-74 energy crisis and subsequent trends towards smaller and more fuel-efficient cars. Performance versions of the Century and Riviera would return in the late 1970s with the advent of Buick's turbocharged 231 V6 introduced in 1978 on the Century Regal Intermediates and the full-sized LeSabre Sport Coupe and then the newly introduced front-drive Riviera in 1979 for the S-Type, which later became the T-Type, a moniker that would ultimately replace the GS badge for sporty performance Buicks in the early 1980s. The Century GS model returned in 1986 for what was now Buick's front-drive intermediate-sized car. The GS was only offered as a two-door coupe and was powered by a fuel-injected 3.8-liter V6 mated to a 4-speed overdrive automatic transmission but with far less horsepower than the rear-drive Regal GN's turbocharged intercooled version rated at 245 horsepower. This Century GS was a one-year-only offering in 1986 sold alongside the Century T-Type Coupe and Sedan. Regal GS/Regal Gran Sport. From 1988 to 2004, there was a Gran Sport version of the Regal. The Gran Sport option generally contained the following items: cloth bucket seats and center console, black, wide, body side moldings, Grand Touring suspension, which included faster power steering, and revised springs and struts, front air dam and aero rocker panels, 16-inch aluminum wheels, fog lamps, two-tone paint, leather steering wheel. Beginning in late 1990, the 3.8L Series I V6 producing 170 horsepower was available. The 1997 to 2004 body style featured a 240 horsepower 3.8L Series II supercharged V6. On January 7, 2009, General Motors confirmed it would offer its 2011 Buick Regal GS with a 255 horsepower 2L turbocharged 4-cylinder EcoTec engine, and a 6-speed manual transmission. This model will be based on the Opel Insignia OPC. The GS California. Buick touted the California as the distinctive personal car for Americana on the GO, using the Skylark platform. The merchandising creation of the West Coast's Mickey Garrett, the California GS became one of Buick's entries into what is now often known as a junior muscle car. The intent of these autos were to provide the visual impact of the era's supercars with the low maintenance and price of a more economical car, while maintaining reasonable performance levels. When reviewed with these thoughts in mind, the California GS delivered quite nicely. They were fitted with a small block GS drivetrain and the exterior received the full treatment including vinyl top, chrome molding package, GS emblems, and special California scripts. This marketing approach was also used in Colorado, using the Colorado name instead of California. 1967 was the maiden year for the California GS. It was available in California only and was not advertised nationally by Buick. Built on the thin pillar coupe chassis, it came equipped with a 340-260 horsepower engine and super turbine 300 transmission. Bench seats were standard and accessories were kept to a minimum to help keep the price down. Car Life tested one in their June issue and ran the 1/4 in 16.7 seconds at 81 miles per hour. They also recorded a top speed of 105 miles per hour. The article contains a lengthy description of the car and how it performed during testing. It is a must-read for anyone interested in learning more about the '67 California GS. Mid-year 1968 saw the official introduction of the California GS, and it is frequently known as a 69 model. Buick asked, "Why settle for less when the California GS, built especially for you, costs no more?" Exclusively designed for Golden State motorists, Buick advertised the car nationally as a high-performance family sports car at an economy car price. Though the car was not included in Buick's yearly catalog, it was shown in a two-page black-and-white fold-out brochure. Custom California GS emblems again graced the rear fenders, while GS ornamentation could be found in the grille and sail panels. The drivetrain included Buick's new 468 350-4 V8 with 10.251 compression and Rochester Ford GC Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor, producing 280 horsepower and 375 lb-ft of torque. The two-speed Super Turbine 300 transmission and bench seat interior were again the only choices. Buick also added chrome-plated wheels and air cleaner lid to the two-door thin pillar coupe. Tires were 7.75 in on 14 in rims. 1969 was the last year of production for the California GS. The car was for the first time featured in Buick's big brochure. A two-page color picture of the thin pillar coupe and pictures of the again standard bench seat interior were included along with equipment descriptions. Tom McCahill tested the car and recorded a 0-60 time of 9.5 seconds and a top speed of 110 miles per hour. Again, the car came with Buick's 280 horsepower 350-4 engine, but now it was mated to the new turbo 350 transmission. Custom California emblems again graced the rear fenders, and the rear marker lights were plain red without Buick's normal 350 or 400 script. Vinyl tops, as with previous years, were standard fare with the California's distinctive GS logo on the sail panel. Notes. External links: Buick GS CAGS National's official website, Annual Buick Performance Meet including the Buick Grand National.